Welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for taking the time out, because I know that we're all busy and we're in different time zones. Everybody's got a lot going on. So this is the truth about e-learning in the 2020s. And when you put something like the truth in a title of anything, like a newspaper title or whatever, people think that there's some kind of scandal to reveal. So I don't know if there is a scandal. We will talk about the truth about e-learning as we go through. And today I represent myself, not any other company. So I've got some opinions and some facts and things that you might agree with, disagree with, but I promise to be completely honest about what I think is the truth. So this is the agenda. So it's a quick welcome and a quick hello. One thing I'd ask you to do is if you could put yourselves back on mute, just so that we cut down the background noise. If you need to talk, just unmute yourself, or you can send a chat message. And this is the agenda. We're going to go through the past, present and future of e-learning. So there's a lot of opinion around the future. We've got some breakout sessions, and we've actually got 3 of them. So these will be short sessions where I'll get Zoom to automatically just pick people and put them into small groups, and I'm going to give you a specific purpose for each group. So you've got 10 minutes for each one, and then we'll kind of review, what you've talked about after each session. I've also got a guest presenter, Dustin Hafke, who will present a session around the academic slant on what's happening with e-learning and some facts and opinion. And I'll let Dustin introduce himself properly a little bit later. Another breakout session, what makes digital learning great? We'll talk about that. Breakout session, and then the future of e-learning. And we've got a prize giveaway. So I did promise in, I think, the early invites that there will be prizes. So the objectives are to understand the past and the potential future of e-learning, to network with other creative people. So this is why I've got 3 breakout sessions. I think I'll limit it to 4 people in each group. Each time we have a breakout session, hopefully, you'll get a different mix of people. And if you find that you've chatted to someone or you found something they've said interesting and you want to contact them, you could do that within that 10-minute meeting, swap email addresses, or I've set up a LinkedIn group, which I'll share with you after the event. So you could always pop a message in there if you wanted to catch up with somebody. To hear and see the latest academic data on e-learning. Okay, so hopefully this will be the fact part of it. To discuss with others what could be the future of e-learning. We don't really know, but I've got some opinions. And I have a chance to win fabulous prizes. Okay, so I have an assistant, Samantha, who will randomly pick people, and there are some prizes. I'm not sure they're fabulous. We'll wait until the end when I do that, and we'll see what you get. So some of you I know, so if you joined early, you would have heard us chatting away. I know some of you, but certainly not all of you. There'll be plenty of people I've never met. If I've no idea how you found out about the webinar or how you joined, but it's great to meet you. And I'm here because I want to share information and ideas about e-learning. You can find me by torret@me.com. So you'll have had an email from me already with the invites. So I wanted to briefly tell you something about me. I'm a freelance trainer. I started my company back in 2003, and I've been focusing on writing and delivering training and e-learning in the Oracle markets. This is typically servicing corporates who have bought Oracle software, and I'm providing the training for them. And I thought about this slide and some key words that I wanted to include. And one was creative. So I've always been fascinated by technology and the latest tools that were available. And I love investigating them and using them and promoting them. So I like to be creative. Value. A lot of my working life has been as a day rate trainer, even if that's for, 12 months with a particular client. I get paid by the day. And one of the things I'd like to move to is moving up the value chain and offering complete solutions to organizations, but I can't do that on my own. Collaboration, it's a key thing for me. I find that I'm very good at some things, not so good at others, and I try and focus on the good things that I can do. But that means that I have to work with other people. And I found that I like working in teams of people and joining together in a joint effort. And connections, I've built up a large network, lots of people I've met over the years. Some of them I really trust, and that is my biggest asset. And in difficult times like this, when people are maybe out of work, your network is your biggest asset to get you back into work. So some things that you already know, I'm sure that we've all remembered using e-learning at some point, and it might have been good, it might have been bad. I'm sure that you've all looked on YouTube about how to do something, and that is a great resource. And I think if you look at children now, they're completely conversant with YouTube and how to find things, and they'll go there first. And lots of adults do as well, I do. Some of you have designed e-learning that other people have used. And that's, if you're a training developer, that's fantastic. Because you can sometimes find out how many people have used it and what they thought of it. And it could be thousands of people. Have you used e-learning and been disappointed? I know that I have. We'll talk about that later. Have your kids used e-learning this year? They might not call it e-learning. They'll call it YouTube or something else. But they're bound to have done it. Have you paid for e-learning? I have. Some has been successful, some haven't, but I've definitely been a consumer of e-learning. And I've also been forced to do corporate compliance e-learning, and most of it's pretty poor, but I've experienced that. So some of these things should chime in with your own experience, and I want you to think about those as we go through this session. So I want to do a very quick poll question, just to get your opinion on something. And I'm just going to load up a poll. Hopefully you will be able to see this in a moment. If I launch the poll, can you see that question? Yeah, Roland, you can be my nodder. Just do a nod if you can see it. Great. Okay, if you could put your answers in and submit it, and then I'll show you the results.
Tom, I can just do the question. I can't. Do you mean in the chat, put our answers?
No, you should see a poll window pop up.
No, I can't. I can just see the question.
Okay, right, I'll move on. Well, let's see if we can catch you on the next one. So I'm going to end the poll. Now, I'm going to share the results. So Roland, give me a nod if you can see it. Yeah, great, okay. So interestingly, 70% went for a blend of webinar and e-learning. Now, I would agree that's what I would be going for. And I'm maybe going to do this poll again later on. Interestingly, 26% have gone for classroom training. I've spent the majority of my life doing classroom training. I used to work for Oracle themselves, doing it week in, week out, and I've done lots of it ever since. And I think this is the first year where my opinion has changed for various reasons that we'll have a look at. I think now a blend of webinar and e-learning is the way to go, but we'll see.
I was going to actually add, Tom, that you should have had a fourth option, which is the typical DBA answer, which is it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Absolutely. Yes.
I agree with that as well. Depends on the subject matter.
Yeah.
Some things just don't translate.
Yeah. No, correct. I just want to rewind a little bit. to the kind of the background to e-learning and the history. In the 80s, we had the introduction of computers and the internet. You know, in the late 20th century, we had e-learning tools that started to appear, and PCs and Apple Macs started to enter the office and the home as well. If you look at the 90s, learning management systems started to appear more in universities than businesses, and students were able to access materials, do tests, track their progress. And in fact, in the 90s, I remember working for a big American company. They had e-learning, but you had to go to a different building. And for me, it was 50 miles away. You had to book it in advance, and you had to sit in a booth, and it was a laser disc. And it was completely non-interactive. It was just like watching telly, you know, not great, but that was the best they could do at the time. In the 2000s, the iPhone got released, so the first real smartphone. Businesses began using e-learning to train their employees. New and experienced workers alike had the opportunity to improve themselves, learn new things. And businesses, I think, still preferred classroom training and regarded classroom training as being superior. Then we get to the 2010s. The iPad is released in 2013. I thought it was much earlier than that, but no, it was 2013. And e-learning is open to everybody. So we've got tools like Udemy, which is a commercial way of selling e-learning online. I've used it. I've paid for courses. They've been very good. We've got YouTube, Vimeo. You can also do courses via Facebook. So individuals and companies alike have got massive opportunities now to learn things at their own pace and in the way that they actually want to do it. And then we get to the 2020s, so we're in the current decade. So we've got the tools and the infrastructure, but in my opinion, I don't think we've got the quality. I see an awful lot of e-learning. Some of it I've created myself. Some of it I've been a consumer for. And some of it's been really poor. Some of it's been excellent, but there was a real mixture out there. Coronavirus has escalated the need to go to the next level. So we need to do more e-learning, and we need to do it better. And also, businesses and education are forced into using it. They're forced into going online, and they're forced to use e-learning. I had an interview in Canary Wharf with a bank 2 years ago, and the interview went really well. But what they wanted me to do was to be in the office 5 days a week. And they had no capacity for working from home, working online. And it was all to do with their security setup. It was just something they never would ever consider. Now, I imagine that has changed for them. They must have changed their infrastructure to allow that to happen. But that's been forced on the business by the coronavirus situation. And e-learning just got real. I'm working with a client in the moment where we've got delegates spread, you know, all over the world in different continents. We can't travel to do classroom training for them. It's just not an option. So we're being forced into supplying e-learning, and in fact, we're doing blended learning, and that's not a choice now. That is the only way we have of doing this. So who can lead? We've got lots of people involved in e-learning: schools, businesses, universities, apprentice assessors, individuals. And I think it's a time for leadership to improve the quality of the e-learning and the scope and the things that we can do with it and the things that we can do to make it better. And I think we've all struggled personally over the last few months. I know I have personally. You know, it's been difficult working from home. It's a completely different setup. But when you are in a time of struggle, it's also a time of opportunity as well. So we're going to have a quick breakout session, and I'll explain the topic in a moment. But lockdown has had a massive impact on us all. Some of us have had to work harder than we've ever worked before. Some of us have been out of work, which could be really, really stressful. And that shadow of uncertainty still hangs over lots of us. Us in the UK, the government have made decisions this week about lockdown and where we can go. And the basic message is go back home, work from home, do not come to an office unless you have to. So what I'm going to do is split you into a group and into groups, and I want you to just have a quick discussion about your personal learnings over the last 6 months.
Tom, I've got a question. It's a burning one.
Yes.
What's all the orange about?
Right. Good question. Good question. You'll find dotted all over this training little things to really invoke unconscious learning in the background. And the modality of color is one of them. So I happen to like orange.
It's not easy, Jet.
I don't want to unpack it too much, but if you look really, really closely and you listen really, really closely, there are lots of little hooks in this training to get that unconscious learning working. Now, a lie I could tell you, but it's easy to remember, is that we're using orange so that if you need to remember this course in the future and refer back to it, all you've got to do is think of orange, and then you'll remember everything about the course. Okay, so that's a kind of a useful line.
Oh, you're like Darren Brown.
Well, we'll find out. We shall see.
I thought it was the colour of what your hair used to be, mate.
So, what I'm going to do is try and break you out into these rooms. Now, I've not done this before, so this is a bit of an experiment. And if I click the breakout rooms, it should do it automatically. It'll pair you up with people. I'll put the title of the topic into the room so you don't have to kind of remember it. And you've got 10 minutes. So most of you are trainers or developers, so you're not shy. So dive in, introduce yourself, talk about the last 6 months and what you're looking forward to in the next 6 months, and then we'll reconvene. I hope you have the opportunity to introduce yourselves to people, and I wanted to do that session to acknowledge that it's been a really tough time, and we've all had, you know, some very different experiences, some more difficult than others. So just wanted to acknowledge that. If anybody wants to dive in and just tell us very quickly, you know, an experience from the last 6 months, good or bad, jump in.
I took notes in our room, and it was a bit of a mixed bag. So Parkash was in our room, who's doing project implementation, didn't enjoy the working remotely and things like that.
Yeah.
Amanda loved it. Carl just doesn't like working. And me, well, I've only been working for the last month, and I much prefer working from home. The no travel, just travel kills me.
Yeah.
Being away, and I feel it's just a much better way to live your life. But that's just me. That's me. Anyone else like to take over?
I'd just like to reiterate that it wasn't that I didn't like work. It's just that I had 6 months off, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So
great, thank you. Well, I mean, one memory I've got from the last 6 months was having a deadline where I had to record some audio for some e-learning as a voiceover, and my house was busy with my wife and my son, and I realized actually I'm not the most important person and my work isn't the most important thing. I had to get it done and I couldn't, just too noisy. I went out into the car, brought my laptop out there to try and record the audio, and then it started raining and it was pelting it down on the roof of the car. So I was doomed, absolutely doomed. And I think that was my lowest point. Okay, let's move on then. So where are we all located? Oh, the world's upside down. Okay, well, it is how it feels at the moment. It really is. We make it right side up. We've got Raza over in California. We've got people in the UK. We've got Parkash in India, Khalil in Kashmir. I'm sorry, I can't remember the lady's name in South Africa. is that in, let's see, is it Arena? Are you in South Africa? We've got
Samara,
Samara.
I believe.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Thank you.
No, I'm up north.
Ah, right. Okay. So we're completely distributed. Now, a year ago, it would never have occurred to me in a million years to run a webinar like this and invite people from all over the world, and lots of people turn up. You know, we've got over 30 people, and you know, to share information and get their opinions on things. It would never have happened. So there are some good things that come out of the chaos. I'm just going to flash up some of the logos of the organizations where people are from. Okay, and I will have missed loads of people, so I apologize for that. There are lots of companies in there, some of them really big, some of them really small. We've got an author there, Ellis, as well. And again, from a networking point of view, you've got a lot of people here that you could be networking with. So, very quick poll, just to see what has been the biggest challenge in the last 6 months. So if I launch the poll, if you can just quickly put your answers in, and then I'll share the results. Again, I could have had an endless list of things that were difficult, but I'm just curious.
What if none of them apply, Tom?
Well, pick the closest one.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share the results. So uncertainty, 50%. Yeah, that tells you everything. As a freelancer, and many of us are on this call, we're used to uncertainty. Typically, we've only got a week's life at a client, and then we can get fired, or we could be there for a year. We never know, and we kind of roll with that, and that's how we like to work. Even, you know, those kind of people have felt very uncomfortable at this time, and it's been really, really difficult. So I can certainly understand that. Okay, next thing I want to do is to introduce you to Dustin, who's going to take over the presentation for about 15 minutes. I'll let him introduce himself. So I'm going to stop sharing. Dustin, are you ready to take over?
I am, and hopefully you guys can see the presentation. Can I just get a quick nod if that's working out? Yeah, wonderful. All right, so my name is Dustin. I was a student at Newcastle University. Now I am a business consultant at PeopleSpark Solutions. So as most people might have guessed based on my accent, I'm not from the UK. So I'm from Germany. I studied organizational sociology back in Germany, and I've moved to the UK in September 2019, and did my postgraduate degree in global human resource management at Newcastle University. So I just finished this September, and I'm working basically in an internship since June with PeopleSpark Solutions. Something that's really interesting, obviously, in the context of e-learning or digital learning, is how that year has played out. With COVID for the university. It was obviously very disruptive. So in March, I went back to Germany. All my courses got canceled, no face-to-face classroom teaching. And we basically had the rest of our course in an online setting. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about is digital learning, e-learning, what's the difference, which we will uncover, and also kind of the advantages and the contrast to classroom teaching when we're looking at it from an academic side. So from studies, what's the performativity, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages when we're just looking at the academic discourse really. So something that I thought was really interesting is looking at the kind of terminology that's being thrown around at the moment. So we have digital learning, e-learning, blended learning. So what is digital learning? I chose a definition that is from the CIPD, because I am from an HR background, and I thought that it is very broad and very fitting. So it's learning that's facilitated, enabled, or mediated using electronic technology for the explicit purpose of training, learning, or development in organization. So it is very broad, and it doesn't state anything about the place, time, or anything else, just basically using electronic technology. And I think that is the way to go forward, because when we're looking at all the solutions that are out there, there's gamification, there is VR, it is just becoming so broad. So the history of definitions, it started as a term in higher education. So it's usually referred to as distance learning in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000. And then 2004-ish, e-learning was kind of emerging as a new term. And now there's digital learning. And the difference really is that e-learning usually is related to be live learning, so synchronous learning, while digital learning is flexible, asynchronous or synchronous. So it could be learning at the same time, learning at a different time, basically people all over the place learning together, learning not together. It's all available for digital learning. So the what and why of digital learning. So it is emerging and prevalent academic term for all digital learning solutions, which includes blended and e-learning. The increased academic attention started in the early 2000s, but when we're looking at the recent years, what I think is very relevant is that even before COVID, so in the LinkedIn L&D survey in this year really, there was a center on upskilling and reskilling using e-learning and digital solutions. And obviously, due to COVID-19, the relevance of remote solutions have become much more relevant really. There's no other choice, as Tom stated earlier. A quote that I thought is really excellent and kind of captures all the information and all the user point of views for the e-learning is: employees who in their home life expect to choose and access a whole TV session at the click of a button, expect to find knowledge they need for their job in a similar way. And it really stuck with me because that's the way e-learning should work. So let's look at academic studies and what's happening. And when I was sitting there and kind of comparing classroom teaching and digital learning, there was something that stood out to me. And that was a study from 2004, where an author tried to kind of compare classroom learning and e-learning. And I thought, if we look at the advantages that I have found for classroom teaching in 2004, which can we now eliminate? So 16 years later, where's e-learning at really? And as we can see, immediate feedback was once titled to be an advantage of classroom learning, which in my opinion, it is not anymore. There are solutions with e-learning systems that offer immediate feedback to the learner. The familiarity to both instructors and student is also something that's debatable. When we're talking about younger generations, we can certainly argue that technology is, that people are very, very familiar with technology, growing up with technology. Tom stated YouTube as an example, and I certainly know that I know my way around technology much better than my grandparents. And yeah, so I think that familiarity is really not a factor anymore. However, we should be wary of just saying everyone's familiar with e-learning, because research into older generations shows that this is not the case. The motivation for students. So there's a 2007 very influential study that demonstrates that learners of e-learning modules are indeed as motivated and self-centered as learners of classic classroom teaching methods when they are studying the same modules. So I think motivating students is also not a factor anymore that we can relate purely as an advantage of classroom teaching. And when we're looking at the cultivation of a social community, I can think back to this year when my university canceled all classes and everything moved to e-learning. There was a social community just based on the LMS, the learning management systems, where people would go into the chat rooms, type each other's messages, and kind of have discussions, and a social community based on the content within the learning experience, so within the e-learning or digital learning solution. So what's in it as real advantages of digital learning then, or are they just similar? So there is some academic claims of better effectiveness. And when we're usually hearing that digital learning performs better or is better, what we're really talking about here, and this is something to keep in mind, is we're talking about knowledge. So usually it would get measured in a post-test. So seeing how do people perform afterwards, and maybe performing and in a test might not be the only measure that's important for learning, but that's usually the claims of effectiveness and where they stem from. Obviously, there are no constraints on e-learning on time or location. So there's flexibility and availability of materials. So I know, I think it was Sammy in my group who talked about his personal learning style just fitting very well with e-learning, where he could just pause the video, go back a few seconds, and then rewatch the video and rewatch the point where there may be difficulties. And this is something that's not available in classroom teaching. However, we should also keep in mind that for classroom teaching, we can ask specific questions, which is not available with e-learning. So the ability to revisit learning is something that is a strength of digital learning, but only if the digital learning covers the thing that we actually didn't understand. And something that I absolutely didn't think about before really looking into the advantages of digital learning, and that is sustainability. So energy and CO2 emissions can be reduced drastically using e-learning. And obviously, I've kind of put it as a motto of e-learning, that is anyone, anytime, and anywhere. Right. So now looking at the advantages, the question really is what gets lost in e-learning compared to classroom teaching? And I think there's three aspects that we can find. So it's the ability to react in the moment based on what the learner says, because LMS systems, and there's currently certainly a lot of personalization and research into emotional AI going on, how that could be implemented at LMS systems. But at the current moment, I think it is fair to say that most e-learning programs cannot do that. How good are the social aspects? That is also something to keep in mind, but also the pedagogical aspects of dealing with knowledge gaps. So it was shown that people usually, that it's beneficial for people to have knowledge gaps and be kind of find out about those knowledge gaps and develop based on their own understanding that they have knowledge gaps, as well as conflict management for kids, which is not quite as relevant for adults anymore, but it's still something that people usually develop in communities within classroom teaching. So yeah, and I'm obviously, if you have any questions on that, go ahead in the chat. I'll have a look at that later. So what it comes down to, in my opinion, is that digital learning can be advantageous, but it's not necessarily. So I already talked about the effectiveness of e-learning, and I think what is very, very relevant is a 2018 study that was just a meta study. So that means they kind of compared a lot of different studies together, and they selected 26 of the most influential studies and measured them against each other. And they found on average that there was a 35% increase in performativity measured as knowledge outcomes of e-learning. So that means that we can say on average, e-learning is about 35% more effective in terms of what people know after the course if they both do have the exact same model in classroom teaching and in e-learning, which maybe going back to the survey kind of proves the point that a lot of people do not agree with or didn't see coming. Something that's also quite relevant is the longitudinal studies. So you could argue, well, yeah, e-learning has a short-term effect, but what about long-term effect? And just recently, in 2020 actually, there's a long-term study that was done, and it showed that the long-term effects on knowledge were basically exactly the same as we could see in traditional classroom teaching, and there was no decrease in perceived preparedness for the job. So people that did training on the job felt exactly as prepared in the job as they would have done if they received the same training in classroom teaching after a couple of years. So in this case, it was after 3 years. There were also really high learning retention rates. So the drop was from 73% to 72% from the second to the third year. So people stayed invested in e-learning and kept going with the e-learning, and the drop from 73 to 72 is pretty much what is expected in classroom teaching in a similar situation. Something that should be pointed out is the digital learning did not produce a long-lasting change in attitude. So people did not actually keep the attitude change for long when they were, for example, receiving emotional training digitally, but they did in classroom teaching. So this is something where, once again, we could argue about, is it because of e-learning or is it because of classroom teaching? What's the advantage? For now, we only know that digital learning does not produce the long-lasting change. And we should know that, for example, this does have an implication on emotional training, on value training for organizations, which at the current moment should maybe not be done using digital learning forms. There's also inadequate learning solutions that lead to frustration, confusion, and reduced learner interest. So that means if the solution does not fit people, that does actually do more harm than good. So all those advantages that we just uncovered are not a factor anymore if the solution is not carefully selected. Because the frustration, confusion, and reduced learner interest were very high and very significant. So this is something for organizations to also think about and maybe see how fitting can we do that. Additionally, something to watch out for is the availability of technology, because I think a lot of people, and obviously all of us are in this webinar now, so we all have access to technology, but the Western standard cannot be assumed everywhere in the world. So for example, in Indonesia, only 35% of students have access to a computer, and that's access to a computer. So that means they can't even access a computer anywhere, which I think for my context seems pretty, well, I cannot really relate to that, and I wouldn't be aware of that. So I think something that's really, really important is to keep being aware of maybe creating more inequalities and ensuring equal opportunities in learning solutions. So I think it all comes down to four big challenges of digital learning, and for organizations, that is usually, and it is dealing with different demands of different generations. So different age groups were shown different effectiveness of e-learning, while I always said that on average, it seemed to be 35% more effective. That does not hold true for older generations, which is usually related back to technology. But something that surprised me when I read about it was kids were actually not as effective in e-learning solutions as they were in classroom teaching. And the reason is a distracting environment. So the key for e-learning and digital learning solutions with children is creating a non-distracting learning environment. There's also advantages of personalization that I think do exist in digital learning solutions, but they need to be used because, first of all, inadequate learning systems do more harm really than they do good. But also there are a lot of advantages that are currently being researched, and this personalization could be the key strength. So for example, there's a lot of research going on, and the academic discourse at the moment is discussing different learner types that are already well discovered, but emotional AI and learning systems are slowly adapting to the style. So maybe how could a learning system cover different learning types? So for example, it could be a questionnaire at the beginning to determine the learning style, and then people could see different content for the same course according to their personal strength. So something that's very disputed here is, however, the learning styles were not actively, but for now, evidenced to result in better effectiveness, and identification and the categorization is also quite questionable because not every learning style could be captured by learning systems, but most companies do see the future in adaptive learning systems, so learning systems that use the advantages of personalization. This also goes hand in hand with careful selection of the right learning solution. So that means, obviously, once again, as the inadequate learning solutions lead really to so much stress with people and so much frustration, the fitting learning solution should be prioritized. So while the personalization kind of relates to what do people expect on the personal note, so on their personal learning styles, the careful selection really means what's organizational context and how can we make that fit so that people do not get frustrated by technological aspects. And lastly, of course, it is ensuring equal opportunities. So how can we kind of get all of that together? How can we ensure that all learner styles, all generations, basically everyone around the world can have the same opportunities in terms of learning and development using digital learning? And I think these four challenges are things where e-learning and digital learning solutions have to improve in the future, but it's also something that is on the way. And maybe this is the way that digital learning can outperform classroom teaching consistently in the future. So that's it from me. I just saw that there's a lot of questions going on in the chat. So maybe I'll end the sharing now and look at the questions. If anyone wants to chip in or comment, you could unmute yourself now and just chip in. Otherwise, I'm just going to have a look at the chat.
I think it was interesting. Thanks for that. You know, coming from a background of adult teaching, one kind of puts aside the requirement for non-adult teaching, which has been sort of forced upon us due to COVID. So it is interesting that, you know, I wasn't even looking beyond that point, even though I have, you know, adult children, a pair of twins that are at college right now doing the learning from home.
Right.
But and I've seen examples of kindergartners being sort of set up with their laptop right in front of them. And I think I commented there that a pre-K child has to be computer literate before their formal education starts. So it's an interesting dichotomy that, you know, you have to consider. It's one model is not going to fit all. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, how do you address a kindergartner as opposed to an adult learner?
Yep. Yeah, and I think that kind of fits in perfectly with kind of the learning styles, the learning generations, but also the non-distracting environment that kind of this generation just requires. Yeah, thank you.
Justin, that was really interesting. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. I thought your comment towards the end was really telling about children and removing distractions. As a, I guess, cut me through the middle classroom delivery trainer, one of my challenges when working with adults in an e-learning setting has always been distractions. And one of the true benefits of the classroom is the removal of those distractions, because you effectively have that captive audience. So I totally agree with you, but I think it extends beyond children into adults as well. And it almost goes back to Tom's comment early on about going to another building to do your e-learning, because we are by our design optimists, and we're always looking for ways to do more. So if I can do my email while I'm doing my e-learning, I will, and I devalue both. So yeah, I'm starting to be converted. You're doing a good job. I wonder how we can remove those distractions from adults as well as kids.
I agree with you, Nathan. I really do, because I'm a bit torn as well. Because when they come into the classroom, one of the first things you say is, don't log into your emails.
Yeah.
That's one of the first things you say, don't log into your emails, because you know they're going to be distracted with them.
Yeah.
And the other technology is, turn your phone off.
Yeah.
Every single time you have to tell them, otherwise they'll start taking emails and they're not focused on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, if they're doing e-learning, are they totally focused, or are people wandering up and down, asking them, well, what about this then? Or what about that then? You know, it's the balance off between having the total focus and not. You know, if you can find a quiet room to do the e-learning and you can sort of focus totally on it, you'll get more out of it. It's if the interaction with the people around you isn't controlled, then I don't know if the focus allows you to get the full benefit out of it.
Roland, it's Simon here.
Pipe in here. You know, I actually posted something on that topic on LinkedIn recently, in terms of even if you were in a little cubicle 50 miles from your home, as Tom had to undergo, even if you left your telephone outside, how can your mind stay focused on a single task? Because I think today our minds have developed or evolved into being able to multitask. Well, that's a lauded, quality to have. But how many of us can sit down and say, okay, I'm writing an essay, or I'm, writing an estimate for something, but my mind keeps on bringing in different threads into my head, and either I deal with them while I'm supposedly doing my primary task, or I'm effectively able to put them aside.
Yeah.
It's Simon Glass here. Can I make a comment on this? Just to address that point about whether people have got distractions around and their ability to focus on something. I mean, I've just come out today of a face-to-face classroom session, and I can tell you that in that session, people had their laptops and were doing other work as well as attending my training. And I think that you know, for myself, it's always important to remember about where the priority is, and that is for the learner. So if the learner's choosing to behave in that way, and it's not disruptive outside the context of the class, then I have to respect that, even though my intellectually might feel that it's not the optimum way for them to learn. So we must always remember learning preferences and styles are driven by the individual. That's the only comment I want to make there.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to Tom, maybe as a closing comment, I think I really like that all the comments, because I think what it certainly says is there are the distractions for adults, but when we're looking at the performance in tests, adults seem to be able to focus and prioritize on the experience, while kids cannot. So that might be the big difference. Kids kind of get distracted and stay distracted, while adults maybe know, okay, now I can't get further distracted. Now I need to focus on the learning environment.
Well,
yeah.
I know that my kids can spend 6 hours watching TikTok videos. So it's not a lack of concentration. I think it's more to do with motivation.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And actually, when they're watching TikTok, they're learning.
Yeah.
Aren't you, baby? She sure is, she tells me.
If it's something they're interested in as well, and they want to learn. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Now, I was going to have a breakout session here, but we've kind of done it en masse. So I'm going to skip past it. What I was going to get you to do is to discuss your experience of how learning has changed over your career and what digital learning could be in the now. And we've kind of done some of that in that session. So thanks for that. So right at the beginning, I said the title was a bit of clickbait, really. So what is the truth? So my personal experience tells me there's a number of pros and cons with e-learning. I'll do the cons first, and then we'll go to the pros. So the one big truth, I think, is that many organizations use digital learning because it's cheaper than the classroom. So if you've got 500 people to train on something, the cost of getting them away from their day job into a room that you're having to pay for and having a trainer, it's very expensive. So they will go for digital learning because it's cheaper. They don't always believe it's better. And in fact, sometimes they'll accept the fact that it's worse, but it's cheaper. And that's a big consideration. It's more important to publish e-learning than for it to actually work. I've seen organizations where they have to do something, they'll go for the cheapest option, and they're really not overly concerned about the effectiveness of it. I've definitely seen that. And also businesses are having to embrace digital learning because of necessity now in COVID. So that there's quite a bit of e-learning, which is kind of a knee-jerk reaction. They've had to produce something quickly, and that means that it's not been that great. Now, on the positive side, I've learned more than I could ever imagine via e-learning. Massive amounts of things. If I had to do that back in the 70s in the library, it would have been virtually impossible. I use YouTube all the time. Everybody uses it as probably their first port of call for learning anything. And we're training our kids up to use YouTube all the time, straight away. Whatever they're learning, they'll go to YouTube first. The tools to build digital learning are changing, they're getting cheaper, and they're improving. And I think that's got to be a good thing. And businesses need e-learning to be effective, as really it's their only choice at the moment. They may have made the choice to go for e-learning because it was cheap. Now it may be their only choice. So here's a quick interview I did with a learner. And I asked that learner, how did you learn a particular topic? And the first thing they said was that they watched YouTube videos. Then they accidentally pressed a mouse button and they realized that they could change keybinds, whatever they are. So they looked on Google and they found out what the other keybinds were that they could set. Then they asked experts what they do, and they got tips from them. So there's a bit of networking here to gather information. They'll go onto YouTube to get stuff, and they'll also ask experts, which could be friends. Now, that learner was actually my 9-year-old son on Fortnite, and he wanted to know how to do stuff. So he will go to YouTube, watch them. He'll try and try and try. He'll discover things by accident, and then he'll ask his friends. And there's a big community there around gaming, which he can pull. Now, what does that tell us? If people need to learn, they'll find a way. So in a corporate environment, generally we're giving training to people, but I think that culture is changing. So people are seeking knowledge. And if we give them access to everything we've got, then they've got far more chances to actually learn things. Many corporate systems lock down the training, so you're only allowed to get to things that are relevant to your day job. But I think that should change. Discovery can be part of the process. Trying things, you can learn a lot from trying, falling over, try again, fall over. That's how we learn to walk. That should be part of our learning as well. And they will use their network to get answers. Now, if we're providing corporate training via e-learning, if it's a substandard solution, they will just go elsewhere. If they don't like the way it works, they'll just ask their friends, they'll get crib notes, someone's written a document. Now, that could be regarded as dangerous in a corporate environment because people could be getting the wrong messages. So we need to make our solution better than whatever they can get in their network. So what can we do? Give people the best ways of learning. Provide options and decisions. There's a lot of research that suggests that if you give some control to the learner as they work through their e-learning, so that there are potentially 2 or 3 or 4 different outcomes, then it actually sticks in their mind for much, much longer, and that they're going to learn far more. So that takes time and money to do, but providing options and decisions gives us that discovery aspect. And provide a network for them where they can share and become experts. This is something that I very seldom see in a corporate environment. I've had one really good personal experience when I was trying to learn Photoshop. Someone recommended an Australian guy who offered e-learning, and it was via Facebook. So I checked him out, and what he was actually doing, this was 7 years ago, it was really, really clever. He created a group on Facebook, and he created a photo album, and he put photos in of his slide pack. So each slide became a photo, and you could only get to them if you were a member of that group, and you had to pay him to be a member. Now that sounds flat and boring, but what he built into those slides were links to videos that he'd built, but also you could ask questions. And that's where it really became powerful, because he would be on that every single day answering questions. But what I found is when he started to work through the slides, other people who were doing the course also put their own answers in, and they started sharing before and after images, that they'd worked on, and they would put long explanations in about how they'd affected a particular photograph. So the thing had a life of its own. Now that guy's called Damien Simmons. I wrote to him last week and I asked him if I could mention him. He's still in business. He's doing exactly the same thing. He's moved off of Facebook and he's got his own platform now. But he did that for 0 cost, which I thought was really smart. My son really insisted that I put that transition in. So what makes great digital learning? And there's a PS here, digital learning might not be the right answer. Okay, it's not always the answer. So there are a few examples I wanted just to whiz through, real world examples. So these are clients that I've worked with over the last 10 years. I'm not going to mention who they are, but just give you a summary. So a global finance change program for $1 billion business. You'd assume a $1 billion business would have a state-of-the-art technology and do a fantastic job. They recorded videos that they offered out to their delegates internally, and PowerPoint and some simulations. Online sessions guided by a trainer with demos and practice sessions. No course notes, so no text at all, or frequently asked questions. Standard operating procedures had not been written, and no stats from the learning management system, so we had no idea who had done the training. No testing, we don't know whether they actually understood it, and follow-up sessions were offered, and in fact they were taken up because they were needed. Another example, an £18 billion business. Digital learning simulations were created, classroom sessions guided by the trainer, demos and practice sessions. No course notes again, or frequently asked questions. They did have SOPs. No stats again from the LMS. No testing. No follow-up sessions. Another client, £840 million business. No digital learning. The director of the project didn't like digital learning, would not fund it, and so there was none. Everything was done in the classroom. Printed course notes from a Word document were the output. Standard operating procedures had not been completed, so the delegates had nothing else to fall back on. No follow-up sessions. Another example, a 1.5 billion university. Advanced communication messages about the training. They plugged the delegates for weeks and weeks and weeks in advance, explaining what was coming up. Digital learning was created for every single task. Their learning management system provided stats and tests, and people had to be tested before they were allowed to use the live system. Classroom sessions were supplied, guided by the trainer, demos and practices. Course notes, slides and simulations were all made available. And topic discussion groups were encouraged. So they were actively encouraged to help each other out. And follow-up sessions were offered. So what I found by kind of putting those four examples together is that no matter how big the company is or how much money they've got, they don't always do a good job. And there are some things that don't really cost an awful lot, which can make a big difference. One example is when you're creating e-learning and you've got lots and lots of topics and you're offering them out, I've seen in a number of situations where the delegate is forced to run through a whole PowerPoint training pack online through the learning management system before they can access the e-learning. Now, I think we should be doing the opposite. All of the e-learning should be made available immediately. So if someone wants to dive in and learn about one particular thing immediately, then they should be allowed to do it. If you're going to build quizzes into your e-learning, which a lot of people do, then record the outcomes, because if you do record the outcomes, then you can pick up on trends where individuals or teams are performing badly, you know, in the quizzes. And that gives you a clue about proactively doing follow-ups, one-to-ones, group sessions, or maybe modifying the training because it wasn't effective in the first place. So there's a quick poll. If I just load this one up. And there's the question. So digital learning is far greener and more energy efficient for various reasons. I'm just going to do the poll now for what you think is the actual energy saving. Yeah, so 30, 40, 70, 90%. So you could put your answer in. Okay, I think that's most people. So if I share the results, most people have gone for 70%, so just over half of you. Now, there are lots and lots of studies on this. The one that I looked at actually had this at 90% because there's no travel involved. There's no printing involved. Everything's online and also you can do it at the time that you need to. So the impact on your family, is less, and that could have an impact on the efficiency as well. So a lot of studies are saying 90%. Okay, let's move on. So the assumption is that classroom is better, but research shows us that digital learning outperforms classroom, but only when the best learning methods are used. So what I mean by learning methods are things like real world context. You could show someone a process via e-learning, and that would be pretty simple to do. But if you don't give it a real world context, it's not going to stick. They won't remember it. Realistic practice. So if you've got simulations involved, that definitely helps, because you're building muscle memory with the mouse clicks if they do it frequently enough, but you're building images in their mind and connecting, the hand-eye coordination, everything. Realistic practice is really beneficial. Spaced repetitions. So I've got a watering can and a plant here. You should be quite comfortable with giving the same message a number of times and actually getting people to absorb that message and try things a number of times. It's a bit like watering a plant. If you don't water it frequently enough, it's going to dry out and it's going to die. If you water it too often, then you're going to drown the roots and it's going to rot. So spaced repetitions, it's perfectly okay. And feedback. If you go to the bother of building quizzes in your e-learning, then you should actually gather that information and share it with people and tell them how they've done. Typically that's done as a pass-fail percentage, but I'm thinking on a bigger scale of collecting that at team level, department level, company level, and actually looking at trends and working out where people are going wrong. And I very rarely ever see that happen. Blended learning using classroom and online learning outperformed classroom instruction on declarative knowledge and also procedural knowledge, and in fact bigger on the procedural. So this is a big change for me personally. I would have always have thought that pure classroom training has to beat every other method, but the academic studies tell us that that's wrong. So being professionals, you have to work with the facts. Overall, digital learning tends to outperform classroom instruction. Blended learning creates the largest benefit. So for us at the moment, because of COVID, this is going to be webinars led by a trainer, building the context in, building demos, practice sessions, repetitions, and key messages. I've done some training in the last year where we did use this method, but one of the important bits of feedback we got from the delegates was that the sessions were too long. And one of the sessions that we did was 4 hours, and people really struggled. So I think we have to take the risk of cutting down the amount of time that the trainer spends with them on the webinar, reduce that right down, and get that as a session for context setting, objective setting, explaining how things work, and then setting them off, and then maybe regrouping with them the next day. And they do the e-learning in their own time. I think that's possibly a better way of doing it. This gets a bit wordy now, but I will be sending you out a copy of the presentation. Retrieval practice prompts learners to retrieve information. So quizzes do work, they do have a benefit, so keep working with those. Learners who retrieve information from memory produce strong memory gains. Okay, so it is worth doing those. My ideal solution, so this is my opinion, mount a marketing campaign weeks or months in advance about the change and the training. Now this fits a corporate model where we're doing a big change piece and we're trying to introduce a new piece of software or a new process. You should involve them way in advance and hold virtual town hall events before the training. Explain how the training will be delivered and why they need it. Okay, because quite often people don't understand why the change is happening. Short web-based sessions with the trainer to set the context and invoke the learning for them. So they do need a nudge still, but I think you can experiment with this and trust them to actually do the e-learning in their own time, and you should still get good results. Make the training easily available. The learning management system should be searchable down to topic level. It should work just like YouTube or Google. If you make it more complicated, people won't bother. And in fact, if you look at the stats for the take-up on corporate e-learning internally within organizations, some of it's quite shocking. And it's because it's tricky to get to. It should be really, really straightforward. Context and scenarios are key to retention. One of the things I have done in the past is do video interviews with people within the business. And you do see this quite often. It used to be very expensive. You'd have to get a third-party media company in to do it. I really don't think that's true anymore. You could do it with an iPhone and a very cheap light and a microphone, and you get really good quality video. Now, at the moment, we're not in offices, so that presents a problem, but you could do it via things like Zoom, and record that interview and blend that into your e-learning. If they recognize a face, it really helps get the message across. Learners should be given assistance in knowing their learning style. Now, learning style may be something new to them. They may not understand it, but you can produce some e-learning that they can run, which will tell them what their learning style is, and use that information to guide them to the best possible solutions. Multiple training solutions should exist for the same topic. This costs money to do, but simulations, video, and also text. Some people really respond well to a course manual. Now, that's a very old-fashioned thing to do now, it seems, but some people will respond to it. They like to be able to search a Word document and actually read something. Other people, they would not take the time to do a simulation. They just want to go straight to a video. So if you could offer all three, that's going to make all the difference. And simulations should contain decisions and have multiple outcomes. Again, it could be difficult to do, does take time and money, but the benefits are quite high. So they can run the same simulation, let's say it's creating an invoice, 3 or 4 times and actually have different outcomes. They respond to questions and the e-learning branches, much more meaningful to them. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So I just want to do another quick poll. So I'll just load this up. Oh, bear with me. Okay, so another quick poll, if you could fill this in for me.
Are you talking for our personal style, Tom?
Yeah, just your personal opinion. Okay, great. So I'm going to end the poll and just share the results. Now, if you look at this, it's actually gone up because I asked the same question right at the beginning. And I think Classroom was much higher when I did the poll at the beginning. And those numbers look like they've gone into a blend of webinar and e-learning. Okay. So, next thing is a call to action. So I want to challenge your beliefs about digital learning. So I've tried to do that today because I've changed my opinion in the last year. I want you to challenge your own organization to flick the on switch. So many organizations say they do e-learning, they don't really take it very seriously, but they're forced into it at the moment. I think they should be going for it and putting a lot of energy into it, and you could challenge that. Be a leader by creating great digital learning. Part of being a leader, I think, is asking awkward questions as well. You know, if you have a learning management system, why is it not used properly? Why don't you store the results of the quizzes for people? Why don't we know who's done which courses? It could be that your LMSs in your environments are fantastic. My experience is that quite often they're not. Invest in yourself by training up on current tools. I do this all the time. I'm very happy to pay for software and to pay for training, and I do that through my business, and I get a lot of benefit from it. Open your eyes wide and really look at digital learning. Look at the learning within your own organization and try and work out why it is as it is, and is it the best that it could be. Also, you don't have a job for life. You've got a life of jobs. So do what interests you. And I find this stuff fascinating. I love being creative and producing things. So I'm putting a lot of energy into this at the moment. And I think we all benefit when we do that. Just a quick diagram here. P.T. Barnum said comfort is the enemy of progress. So if we've got a graph here, creativity, and we've got limits on us. When we've got 0 limits on us, so we've got all the money we ever want to spend on e-learning, we actually are not very creative, nothing at all. As we introduce more and more limits, the creativity goes up and you get to a sweet spot here where you get to be the most creative. If you add more and more limits in, such as, you know, for me, the internet wasn't working well this week, so I had to find a solution. So I went to my mother-in-law's, so that's where I am now. If you're overloaded with the limits, then the creativity drops. Now, I think we could be at the highest point of creativity in my career because of the limits that we're under. But we still have the whole of the internet. That seems to be holding up reasonably well. We've got fantastic tools. Some things are now given out free of charge. You don't even have to pay for them. There's a lot of things that we can do. Does anybody know who said this? It was in, I think, 2009. Anybody know? No, it is, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Rahm Emanuel. It was Obama's first chief of staff, and he was talking about the financial crash in the previous year. So a crisis is always an opportunity. We've got, you know, a great opportunity at the moment to make a real difference. So I'm going to try and do another breakout session. I'm going to keep it a bit short because we're getting close to 7, to discuss what you could do differently over the I have got some prizes to dish out. It's something I wanted to do. If I ran this last year, I may well have hired a room and had teas and coffees for everybody. But this is all virtual, so I'm making a donation to Liverpool Soup, which is a fantastic charity. There's a video here, and I'm just going to play it. Oh, no, it won't work. Okay, it's only 20 seconds long, and it's from one of the founders of the charity. It's a postcode charity. They basically give money to other charities, but in a very localized area in Liverpool. And I asked people to wear orange, and Louisa said she doesn't have anything in orange because her hair's orange. And in fact, there it is. So Liverpool Soup get 50 quid.
I just want to take a moment to say.
Oh, and prize giveaway. Thank you very much for coming to the training. So I wanted to just give you some prizes. There is a book, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. He's an American professor, fascinating guy. I read this about 20 years ago, and he's updated it recently, and I haven't read the updated version, but it's one of the best books ever read about how humans interact with the world. So Samantha, can you give me a name? And it is Karen Collier. Karen, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here, Tom.
Great, okay. Contact me and I'll post it out to you.
Lovely, thank you.
The next one is a £20 Amazon voucher that you could spend on an e-learning book, which is what you ought to do, or you could have some bubble bath, whatever you want from Amazon. So Samantha, give me another random name. And it's Simon Glass. Simon, are you still there?
It'll be bubble bath.
Bubble bath, fantastic. Right, okay, so...
just a second, that sounds like Mr. Mould was encouraging you there. There'll be bubbles with Mrs. Glass this evening.
Right, very good. There's also an orange Fruit of the Loom polo shirt. Okay. So, this is for Samantha. Can you give me another name? And Samantha, come on, hurry up. Right, it's Ellis Stewart.
Hey, thank you.
Ellis Stewart, very good. Okay,
Sure.
and I think we've got one more. There is an orange space hopper. Samantha, can you give me another name? Come on, Samantha, do the random thing. And it is Anthony Hargreaves.
It's got my face printed on it.
Yeah, it's always a winner, Anthony.
Wow.
Oh, he needs one of those. He was bouncing around all the time in his video.
Oh, it's excited. It's excited.
So,
bounce on Anthony.
Because I'm conscious of the time. I may be running some events in October. I'm going to send you out a survey and we'll see if people are interested. Credits. I just want to thank Scott Smith from People Spark for the inspiration. He did an event a couple of months ago and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, I want to do something like that. Now, as it turns out, mine was nothing like his. But anyway, thanks to Scott. Videos, I got some promo videos done. Andy Brooke helped me with that. Academic support from Dustin, thank you. Jackie Wright did a training session for me on Gagne's conditions of learning about 7 years ago for an hour, and it stuck in my mind. And slide back, and loads of people helped me with.
I didn't think so either, no.
Thanks very much.
That's a tag of say.
Time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
Tom. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks,
Tom. Bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.
Bye.